is Harry Chrissakis. I'm the Herbalist. Today I wanted to speak about insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes. They are basically one disorder in that insulin resistance is considered the pre-diabetic condition. The idea of the scope of the problem, the scale of it, is pretty staggering if you look at the numbers. There are roughly 35 million type 2 diabetics, but there are about 70 million people that have insulin resistance. And if you put those two numbers together, that constitutes about a third of our country. Now those are epidemic type numbers. And one of the reasons why it's so important to take this as a serious problem is that both insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes act as a foundational element in the creation of both vascular disease, that is heart disease, and stroke, and that is directly to them, and indirectly to cancer. Now there are 5 fundamental legs that go into the development of insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes, and they are primarily lifestyle things, wrapping themselves both around diet and exercise. However, there is also some things that have to do with supplements. To give you an idea of how things develop, it often takes decades for this to begin to happen, to show itself as a problem. But indeed it is one, and the numbers continue to escalate in all the categories that I just mentioned. So, in order to get a grasp of how to work with this thing, because it is possible to turn around both insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes, you have to first start with diet and exercise. And the 5 basic problems break themselves down this way. The first one is the excess consumption of carbohydrates and or sugars. And generally people don't understand that the category of carbohydrates is usually larger than they think. It's not just pasta and bread, it's also potatoes and rice. It's also fruit juices and certain vegetable juices. It's also alcohol. So again, we tend not to think of these type of things as sugary or sweet, but our body definitely looks at them that way when it converts them into glucose very rapidly. This problem, in terms of the excess consumption of carbohydrates, is something that we've been trained into. It's a lifestyle, and they're ubiquitous. The thing about carbohydrates is they're all over the place. They're inexpensive. They taste good, and once you get addicted to them, you crave them. And usually the part of the problem is there's a drop in energy. One takes the carbohydrate and or sugar, and they're back up again. So it appears as if it's innocuous, but in fact it's undermining our health in a big way. Now I go into that aspect of it in more detail in my lectures, but this is going to be just a short video where I want to go over these 5 legs. And as I mentioned already, the first one is the excess consumption of carbohydrates and sugars. If you look at a person's day-to-day diet, they get up in the morning, they have a cup of coffee and a donut, or a couple of cookies, or they may have a slice of bread with jam on it, or they may have a glass of orange juice with something sweet as well. If you look at their snack that they have between breakfast and lunch, it's also, again, something sweet or carbohydrated that they repeat the process with. If you look at their lunch, it can be something like pasta or a sandwich, followed by a dessert and or a drink. Their 3 o'clock break is often a soda and a candy bar. And again, their late night snacking and eating throughout the night adds to the problem as well. But if you look at what they're doing throughout the day, they are basically carbohydrate loading. And we can get away with this process for years. Our body has an amazing capacity to continually try to adjust to this. But at a certain point, we start to get hurt from it. And that's because there are other things that go into creating the problem. The second part of the problem is the excess consumption of poor quality fats, which are again as ubiquitous as carbohydrates. So almost everything on your supermarket shelf, with the exception of extra virgin olive oil, would be considered a poor quality fat. Of course, all your trans fats, as in the case of margarine, your deep fry, a lot of poor quality dairy and meat fats, all contribute to the problem. And the way they do that is this. The fats we eat are part of the cell wall structure of our cells. That is, the fatty acids that are in the cell wall come from the fats in our diet. If we eat poor quality fats, like the ones I just mentioned, which many of us do, they get incorporated into the cell wall and they make the cell wall hard. When that happens, the cell begins to resist the entrance of glucose into it. And insulin is the primary hormone that is delivering that glucose into the cell. So the cell starts to become insulin resistant. That is, the insulin cannot deliver glucose into the cell. This starts a cascade of big problems, because when there is resistance and sugars begin to get elevated in the bloodstream, the only response by the primary organ that produces insulin is to produce more of it. And when that happens, now you start to have elevated levels of both insulin and glucose in your bloodstream, both of which are extremely damaging. Now, the third leg of the difficulty is a lack of trace minerals: chromium, zinc, and magnesium primarily. Chromium's primary function is to create an insulin receptor on the surface of the cell. If we don't have it or don't have enough of it, it doesn't make it. And if you don't have a receptor on the surface of the cell, it cannot pick up the insulin. Chromium used to be part of our diet because it was in our soils, but due to agribusiness, it has been stripped out. The same thing is true of zinc and magnesium. So supplementation is necessary as a part of a program to turn around both insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes, which you can. It can be done through the implementation of these 5 legs that I'm discussing right now. The fourth leg of the problem is a lack of resistance exercise. And resistance exercise is when you put a load on the muscle, walking uphill, bicycling against a load, basically working physically in the yard, pushing, pulling, lifting. When you put a load on the muscle, the deal with muscle cells is this: our liver stores 1/3 of our body's sugar stores, but our gross muscles store the other 2/3, so that when we engage them with physical exercise, resistance exercise specifically, they have to burn up their sugar stores in order for their cells to function properly. Now, to get a supply back into the cell, they can pull sugar or glucose directly from the bloodstream into the cell. They do not need insulin. So this, in effect, gives you an extra added balancing element within your physiology in terms of blood glucose. This is why resistance exercise is crucial in order to turn type 2 diabetes around. The fifth leg of the problem is stress. And stress as a quantifiable thing, not a nebulous term. That is, you can measure stress either through blood, saliva, and or urine. And in saliva, it's a cortisol measurement, which is one of your secondary stress hormone that you release. You have adrenaline and cortisol right behind it. And in terms of the breakdown of adrenaline or noradrenaline, those tests would show up in your blood or urine tests. And again, those are 2 stress hormones. So you can actually objectify that a person is stressed out. And this plays also a major role in the development of insulin resistance. Just stressing someone enough, long enough, can induce insulin resistance. Things like poor quality sleep alter blood numbers and help induce insulin resistance. So again, a number of things go into it, but these are the 5 primary factors, and I'll go over them once again. The excess consumption of carbohydrates and or sugars, the excess consumption of poor quality fats, a lack of trace minerals, a lack of resistance exercise, and stress, again, as a quantifiable thing. That is not some kind of nebulous term that we use. There are a number of things that go into helping turn a person around, but this is the basic framework. If you want to know more about type 2 diabetes and insulin resistance, you can go to my website, herbalistandherbs.com, and if you wish to contact me directly through email, it's contact@herbalist-herbs.com, or through my direct number, which is 530-933-8244. I hope this helps you, and I hope if you go into my website and further your information in your search, that will help you as well. Good day.